Greetings sailors, and welcome to my look at the HMS Belfast, the Tier 7 Premium Royal Navy Cruiser. Now, I'm kind of tempted to say that this is the E25 of World of Warships, but I think the E25 of World of Warships title has already been taken. I think that is the Imperator Nikolai. Although there are some similarities. Now, I don't think this is as overpowered in warships as the E25 turned out to be in World of Tanks, but it has not that many downsides. Most of it is basically gravy. It's a pretty nice ship to play. The biggest thing that people might struggle with is the fact that it's a light cruiser and it dies really, really easily. But if you can stay alive, you can do a buttload of damage with this thing. It's a really capable ship. To the point where I'm wondering why it's a Tier 7 and not a Tier 8, because the regular town class cruiser, the Edinburgh, is a Tier 8, whereas this is at Tier 7. But it gets Tier 8 equipment. But we'll come to that later. So, Belfast itself is, it's post-war. This is how Belfast looks today. It's a museum ship on the Thames, and this is how it looks after a 1950s era refit. It was something like 1956 to 1959. And so that's why it looks different, especially around the bridge from the Edinburgh, even though they are basically town class cruisers. In stats, however, it is not too dissimilar from the Fiji. It's not like the E25 where it's the stats that make it stand out. The E25, if you are unaware, basically has a Tier 5 gun on a Tier 7 tank destroyer, but the actual stats of the machine are amazing in a lot of ways to make up for the fact that it has what at first glance seems like a completely inadequate gun. It's not so much the guns or the stats surrounding the guns or the armor or anything like that that makes this possibly overpowered. It is the equipment that it can mount, and it's the consumables that it can use. And it's unique in both those regards. It makes it all the more confusing that the Prince Eugen came out in the state that it did, because the Eugen really stands out for, well, not standing out, for basically just being a carbon copy of an existing ship. And the only different thing about it was the premium camo that you had to pay extra to get, which then made more credits. So, I don't know, if you like a hipper already, then okay, get the Eugen, but in this case, it is... And it's not just like, say, the Flint getting smoke, or the Atago getting a heal, or the Kutuzov getting smoke in those long-range guns. It gets the ability to use hydro, smoke, and radar all at the same time. So it can smoke, and also it gets HE shells. So it gets the benefit of the really good British 6-inch AP shells, plus it gets HE shells. So the combination is potentially extremely powerful, but because it's a fragile light cruiser, a lot of how well it's going to do is going to depend on the person playing it. So enough of an introduction, we'll get to some actual stats, and we'll do this how we always do this. The hit points, first of all, 35,700 rather, which puts it third best at Tier 7. That's behind the Miyoko and the Straws. Torpedo protection, 4%. It's not much of anything, but it's better than a lot of the other cruisers, which get a whopping 0%. Armour-wise, it ranges from 13mm to 114, and I'll have a section specifically about the armour, using the armour viewer, at the end of the video. I've decided to place that at the end of the video. Guns, you've got 4 triple turreted 6-inch guns. And in a lot of the gun stats, it's basically the same as the Fiji, except that you don't get HE. There is, of course, another 6-inch gunned cruiser at Tier 7, and that is the Straws. The Atlanta and the Flint also possibly bear mentioning, because although they have the smaller caliber 5-inch destroyer guns, they are not completely dissimilar in playstyle. But I think this is more like the Jaws in terms of how you use its guns. The Jaws has, in a lot of ways, better stats on the guns, but it doesn't get the excellent normalization that these British 6-inch AP shells have. So it's, you know, you don't get the range, but you get those AP shells, so it's kind of 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. It's a 7.5 second reload, which is very slightly faster than the Jaws. Not as fast as the Atlanta or the Flint, of course, but that places it well ahead of all of the 8-inch gunned cruisers. Turret turn time, slightly worse than the Jaws, 25.7 seconds, again identical to the Fiji. With Expert Marksman, you can get that down to a shade under 23.5. So it moves the turrets, the turrets move rather, reasonably well. You're not going to have too much difficulty tracking targets. Range is 15.4 kilometers, which outside of the Atlanta and the Flint is actually the worst of the Tier 7 cruisers. The next worst is the Fiji's the same. This is again the same stats as the Fiji, so they're kind of jointly worst. The next of the next worst rather is the Myoko with 15.6, but of course that has rather bigger guns. Onto the shells. The AP damage is 3100, and as I've noted, the normalization values are really quite good. I don't know how they compare to the American 8-inch gun AP shells, but basically what that means is with the normalization you will be able to pen at angles that other shells would bounce at. And especially considering the caliber of the shells, that makes them really quite powerful. But this was a relatively late buff to the British cruisers when they decided to remove the HE from the regular line. It basically necessitated buffing the AP shells, and I think the Belfast basically gets to enjoy the benefit of that buff whilst also still having HE, so it gets to have its cake and eat it. The HE shells on this are a maximum of 2100 damage with a 9% fire chance, both of which are worse than the Jaws, but I mean, you can take a demo expert captain to buff that figure. However, having a demo expert captain is of absolutely no use whatsoever on the regular line. So this is one of those premiums where it almost needs its own captain to get the best out of it. And that devalues it, of course, as a captain trainer. Now, you can still use it as a captain trainer for your regular CLs, but it's not going to be getting the most out of it. Shell velocity, 841 meters a second, relatively slow. These are not fast shells like the Jaws has, but you'll just, you know, learn to compensate. It does mean, however, at the longer ranges, and you can see the arc on screen that these shells have as well, it means at the longer ranges that you are possibly going to struggle to land hits on targets. But it's good enough at the shorter ranges, getting relatively reliable hits, especially at the shorter ranges as well, where the arc is a bit flatter. That was an awfully close miss to my superstructure there from, is that Yachty in the Scharnhorst? Can't quite tell from the... it will be, yes. I'm having to do this all on one monitor, which is slightly awkward because half of it's blocked off by a spreadsheet. So yeah, what was I talking about? Yeah, the velocity and the arc. Yeah, you have to be quite close to get a flatter arc, and if you do get that flatter arc, that's when you can really start reliably getting citadels. And I found that I did have to be quite close, especially with cruisers. I mean, cruisers you know where to go for anyway, but with battleships, with these AP shells, it's worth going for the fore and aft armour, which is relatively soft, and you can get quite nice salvos. You won't see that so much in this game, although I do switch up between the different ammunition types quite often, and that's something you should do in the Belfast, is learn when to switch ammo types. But in the next game, you will see me firing at least one battleship where I'm consciously trying to go for the bow armor, because I know I can get reliable salvos of several K damage, several thousand damage every 7.5 seconds. And that stacks up. That really does stack up. But because this is a 6-inch gun cruiser, you are going to have to get used to the fact that a lot of the time you're just kind of chipping away a bit of health here and a bit of health there, but it's the rate of fire that then makes that dangerous. Secondary armament, you have 4 twin mount 102mm guns. You probably won't notice them very much. They have a 5-kilometer range. That's, I don't know, that's nothing special at this tier. A lot of the ships have these kind of twin mount 100mm-ish. I mean, the Indianapolis has got 8 single mount 127mm guns. I think the Miyoko's got 127mm guns. So some of them have bigger secondaries, but generally speaking, cruiser secondaries don't count for much. AA rating. In theory, on paper, this has the best AA at Tier 7 on a cruiser. But there's one major caveat to that. You can mount hydro, you can mount smoke, you can mount radar, but you do not have the option of defensive AA. So you're just relying on your raw anti-aircraft capability. Now on this captain, I was using Demolition Expert, not AFT, but I did mount the equipment that gives me extra AA range. So the base AA range is out to 5 kilometers, but with that equipment you can get it out to 6. The overall DPS is also 212, which is best in class. That's actually better than the Pensacola gets, and it's actually better than, I think, well, there's nothing else that's even really close. The Indianapolis is a little bit behind that. The Fiji is definitely behind that. So, yeah, it's pretty good overall, but the better part of that DPS is within the inner envelope, the 3.5 kilometer envelope, which is composed of your, I want to say 20mm guns, or is it 40mm guns? I can't remember offhand, but it's a bunch of Bofors cannons that give quite a healthy amount of AA cover. So anything that extends your AA ranges is useful. It might be good to have a captain on this that has both AFT and Demolition Expert, because you will get the full benefit of having that extra bit of AA cover and the extra fire chance. You don't have any torpedoes. Now this is one of the downsides of this, one of the very few downsides. The regular Tier 7 cruiser, of course, does the Fiji. The only other ones that don't are the Pensacola and the Indianapolis. And I think everything else at Tier 7 that's a cruiser gets torpedoes. So this is one of the things that sets it apart from the Edinburgh and the Fiji. You've got HE shells, but you don't have torpedoes. And torpedoes do add some utility. But arguably, you would rather have HE shells than torpedoes. And I'm sure there are some players who are trying out the Royal Navy cruisers right now that would quite happily trade their torpedoes for HE shells. But the fact that they don't have HE shells is actually, like, this is inspired by historical accuracy. I know, wargaming and historical accuracy, it's a bit of a novel concept. But the actual 6-inch shells that the Royal Navy used during World War II, from what my understanding is anyway, were pretty much just, they were either armor-piercing or they were like armor-piercing fragmentary or something like that. They didn't have pure high-explosive shells on these 6-inch gun-light cruisers. They might have done on the very few classes of heavy cruisers, and well, I don't know if iChase has done any kind of video on this, but there are a couple of classes of heavy cruisers that the Royal Navy used during World War II, but it was like 3. So a heavy cruiser line would be a bit trickier, but you could maybe have one branch off the light cruiser line at some point. I'm sure we will see some heavy cruisers at some point. Anyway, I've gone a bit off topic, so back to the stats. Speed is, again, identical to the Fiji. It's got 32.5 knots, which is reasonably fast for a cruiser. It's not the fastest by far. The Miyoko and the Shores both have around 35 knots, but everybody else is around about 32, so it's pretty normal. The turn radius, however, is not fantastic, 680 meters, which is not awful. I mean, the Miyoko, for instance, has 780, the Shores has a whopping 900, but 680 is still a bit on the wide side, considering that you are a light cruiser. And this was, when I played through the British cruiser line, just generally, the very first time we had them for testing, while they still had HE shells. This is one of the things that I didn't like so much about them, is that some of them have got really nice turn radiuses, but others don't. It's a bit all over the place. So 680 is among the worst turning radiuses on British cruisers, and I think the Edinburgh might be the same. I have a feeling it might be. The Fiji, by comparison, has 590, which is actually, I think, best at its tier. So I think my feedback initially was, I think they should all have 650 or less, but sadly they did not become any more nimble. So that's a bit of a downside. The rudder shift time is also not good. It's 9.6 seconds, so you're going to want to take that rudder shift equipment. It is worst in class. 9.6 is dead last for the tier 7 cruisers. The next worst is 9.1 on the Indianapolis, but that has a much better turn radius. And what else is pretty bad? The Shores only has 8.8, but of course the Shores has that horrendous 900 meter turning circle. So yeah, the rudder shift time and the turning radius don't seem to really bear that much relation to each other in terms of like, there's not really a correlation as far as I can tell. So I think the turn radius could be better, but I mean, 680 is not awful, not by any means. Lastly, we come to camouflage. Now, this being a premium, of course, it gets camouflage as part of its deal. So the base detection range without any camouflage is 11.3, but with the camo, which of course you will be using, is 11. 11's all right. 11's actually better than a lot of the other cruisers get with camouflage. I think the Atlanta is the only one with camo that's actually less than that. But you can mount the concealment system on this, which is normally reserved for tier 8 and above. So this is the first and only tier 7 ship that can mount a concealment system. So with camo, you can get it down to 11. If you have the concealment system, you can get it down to 10.2, and if you've got both of them together, it's 9.9. To get less than 10 kilometers on any other cruiser, you have to have concealment expert on the captain. And just looking at this list, there's not many of them that can do it, even with concealment expert. The Fiji can do it, the Atlanta and the Flint can do it, and that's it. If you manage to get a concealment expert captain alongside your camo and your concealment system, you can get this down to 8.5 kilometers. That's ridiculous. There are Russian destroyers that don't have camo that good. At least going by memory. I might be wrong about that. But there are Russian destroyers that have pretty bad camo. So, yeah. That's pretty amazing. And on that basis alone, I think that is where a valid comparison to the E25 comes in, because that also is ridiculously stealthy for its tier. So that is probably the biggest strength of this thing. It's ridiculously hard to see until it's quite close up. Now, it's not like you can use that to sneak up and drop torpedoes in somebody's face, but even so, being stealthy is a huge advantage in this game. So this is probably the biggest reason why this might be considered overpowered, alongside the fact that it gets hydro, smoke and radar, and it can use them all at the same time. This, by the way, this is me trying to hit that bow section and not doing it that successfully overall, but yeah, I had some nice salvos out of this. I did, in this one, try to mix it up a bit more with the ammo use as well, to consciously try and use AP ammo a bit more instead of just relying on the HE. However, I nearly got caught a cropper by that Omaha's torpedoes, but he released them too far away, so there wasn't really any danger there. It's just I was caught a bit unawares. I was so focused on that Congo. So now I've done talking about the stats, I can talk about the game at hand. That first match we had was one where I was in a division, so there was a bit of coordination and a bit of division play going on, and me dropping smoke for my teammate. But in this one, it's just me alone in a random battle. And this is actually from earlier today, as I'm recording this. It has been a weekend of infamy. I've played, I think, 14 or 15 games and won 4 of them, including a game where we had an AFK Lexington. He literally loaded into the battle, launched his planes, and then went AFK. Just left the game. Closed his client, whatever. He had 1 XP at the end of the game, so he left. And it's just been game after game like that, where it's crushing losses. You know, we lose all of our teams, and we end up only killing 2 of the enemy ships. Now, I'm not going to spoil it and tell you if this was one of those games or not. I did win at least 3 games, including one in a Belfast, but I'm not going to tell you if it's this game. I should also mention, having said this is hot off the presses, the reason why I have a Belfast in my port at this point, it's not because I went and bought one, it's because it was gifted by Manty111, so a big thank you to him for that. I did, however, go and buy myself something, which was the Fujin. That's been on sale, and with the changes coming to Japanese destroyers, which hopefully Wargaming will let us test at some point for more than 2 days, plus Wargaming, plus yeah, I figured it might be nice to have a premium Minikaze, just in case there are any changes to the actual Minikaze, because the Minikaze is a fun ship. And I don't have the Kamikaze either. I've never had a premium version of the Minikaze. And having said earlier that the Eugen is basically just a fresh paint job on the Admiral Hipper that they've charged actual money for, the premium versions of the Minikaze are kind of that as well, except I think there are some differences between them. Anyway, that's a nice tasty Fuso. I think I did try some AP shells against this guy, but you need a clear shot at the side armour. From what I mean, you can look it up on the armour viewer now, of course, but from what I understand, it's not like you don't shoot at the belt with these shells. You're trying to go for the upper belt armour, or you're trying to go for the ends, basically. So you're trying to go for the softer bits where you know you can penetrate. I completely screwed up that smoke drop there, by the way. I'm still getting the hang of this. You have to slow down. You really have to slam on the brakes. And although this ship accelerates very fast, that's one thing I haven't mentioned yet, and I think the British cruisers do generally accelerate very well, but they don't decelerate particularly fast. So you've got to judge it absolutely right, and I've now got to... I can stealth up by not firing, it's fine, there's nothing that's close enough to detect me. Having said that, I just got detected by something. It had to have been a, I don't know, a destroyer or something. Or maybe it was the Fuso backing out. Actually, it would have been. It's really hard to tell the numbers on the little preview screen. Oh yes, there we go. I've made it full screen now. I don't have to look at my spreadsheet anymore, so I can indeed make it full screen. So he backed out and spotted me, but I was able to back into the smoke, so that's fine, except I've wasted a bunch of time doing that. And of course, the smoke only lasts for... it's a minute and 40 seconds, or a minute and 43 seconds, something like that. So it lasts for a reasonably long time, but it's not American length of time. So that Warspite looks like he's not going full speed. He looks like he's slowed down a bit. But fortunately, you can get the shells out reasonably quickly, so it doesn't matter so much. I can recalibrate and then just plonk down the shells. And it actually turns out this guy is, even though he's out in the open, he's slowing to a halt, and then he's going to start reversing out in the open. Not quite sure why. Now the accuracy you can see here, I mean this is basically a stationary target. The accuracy is not super good. You can of course take the module that gives you, the equipment that gives you better accuracy, which you might want to do, but that occupies the same slot as the equipment that increases your anti-aircraft range, which I decided to prioritize because I've been meeting a lot of carriers recently. It might just be me getting unlucky, but yeah, it's not going to take carrier players that long to figure out that these British cruisers do not have defensive AA. So it's quite good that this does have pretty good base AA. Anyway, queue up some AP shells for this Nuremberg, who I should be able to hurt rather hard. Hopefully. Although bow on, I might not get to do that much. I'm also being a bit wary of those dive bombers. Now our carrier's died already, unfortunately, so their carrier basically has a free reign. We are extremely down on points right now. But we're not done yet. There is a chance we can maybe bring this back, because, as it turns out, they've got an AFK ship. Did I mention that this weekend has just been the hive of scum and villainy? It's not been so much, like, there's not been any team killing or anything like that. It's just been people being AFK and people just playing awfully. And this game was no exception. They had a battleship that clearly was in at some point. That's not a spawn position. But no, they're just not there anymore. Anyway, I'm taking a little bit of damage. I've got the hydro going because this guy's clearly close enough to drop torpedoes. But there we go. So I managed to take, I think, most of his health. So this Congo, he's not a threat. I know he's not a threat, but I want to set him on fire because we need the points. We need to kill things. So if I can get him on fire and have him burn out, which I'd have to set multiple fires to do, then that would be pretty damn useful for the team. But of course, setting fires is entirely dependent on RNG. This is also one of those rare occasions when having torpedoes would be incredibly useful, because this guy's just stationary and would not dodge. And of course, flooding takes a lot more health away than fire damage does. Although if you get 4 fires going, then of course that can also rack up rather quickly. However, I've had no luck so far, even with the demolition expert on this captain. And that's multiple hits at this point. I'm not even counting how many salvos it's been, but I've already taken off about 10k health just from... oh, there we go, finally set a fire. Just from the HE shells. So I'm farming this guy a bit, but it's more that we really, really need the kill because we really need the points. So I'm continuing to fire at this guy, even as I'm now setting a course for the middle to try and help the battleship and the destroyer that are there. But that Dunkirk is very low health. And the Fuso... I mean, the Fuso is firing into the middle, but he's now going chasing after the carrier. He's not... Like, if he'd stuck with me, or if I'd been in a position to stick with him, then I could have given him AA support. But I can't. We need the cap point. He's going the wrong way, basically. So there's not a lot I can do here. I have to go and contest the middle. And therefore I can't give this guy AA support. So I know there's a couple of cruisers to the south. The Bayern is the immediate threat. He's also the easiest to kill. And... yeah, that was a bit weird. I only put out 1 blob of smoke. That should have been 2 blobs of smoke. So... I can't tell you what happened there, only that there's something wrong with the Royal Navy smoke. There seems to be. You don't always put out smoke even though you're moving through a place where you should be putting down smoke, if that makes any sense. That was a very clumsy way of saying it, but I know what I mean. In theory, I should have moved through the first blob in time to put down a second blob, and I didn't. And I don't know why. And that's going to be rather costly. So I decided at this point, okay, screw it, I'm just going to go forward, try and finish off this Miyoko. I've done over 100k damage, but that's a pair of emeralds who are platoons, so they're going to be focusing me. But my immediate concern is kill the Miyoko. We're also going to lose the Fuso, who... I mean, the carrier predictably focused on him because he's going up after the carrier. So the carrier, he's not even going in the right direction. The carrier's over near C somewhere, and this Fuso was going up into the top whatever corner. So no idea what the Fuso was thinking. Absolutely no idea. But that's us now, another ship down. And if you figure at this point that we're not going to win, because I'm now extremely low health, then you'd be correct. But I more wanted to use this one because I'm still not done yet. I'm not done in terms of damage done. But I'm going to get to show a bit more of the power of these AP shells, especially when you're top tier. So broadside emerald, reload for AP, and hopefully I can get some nice citadels. There we go. Not a big chunk of damage. But I'm just critically low health now. We do have another battleship left alive, but there we go. Look at that, 5 citadels. That was Molotov levels of citadels. Yeah, that last remaining battleship hasn't done a huge amount, basically. So this is about to be me, I think. Or is there another salvo coming in? There is very, very shortly. It might be this next salvo that kills me. So this is one of those ones where I made an absolutely Herculean effort, and it still wasn't enough. So that was a high caliber Confederate and a Kraken Unleashed with 142k damage, and it still wasn't enough because it's been that kind of a weekend. But it just goes to show you that you can do a lot of damage in a Belfast. It might be a squashy light cruiser, but whereas with something like the Cleveland or the Shores, you tend to see people throwing around a lot of HE. You can afford to use a lot more AP shells. And I don't know if you noticed, I didn't really stop to point it out at the time, but the results screen for the first one, I actually did more AP damage than I did HE damage. And that's going to be the case in this game as well. I'll have done more AP damage than HE damage. Oh dear, I nearly made it through a video without coughing, but sadly not quite. So yeah, we're just, I don't know, we're just going to watch the sad end of this. I mean, this Hiei is now alone, and I think he actually survives, but the enemy's so close to winning on points at this stage that that's going to be that, unfortunately. So this was one of the closer games I've had today, and it was undoubtedly the best I'd been able to do in damage, but despite doing a monster amount, it just wasn't enough. Just not enough at all. And I've no doubt that you could do even more than that with a Belfast, with the right circumstances. And obviously being top tier helped. I don't think I've been able to do anything like that if it had been top tier, if I'd been bottom tier and the team had sucked that much, because that's been the case several times today where I've been in tier 9 games and the team has sucked that much, but yeah, in this case, it just wasn't enough. So, 1,500 base XP on a defeat. Yeah, that's just one of those games where you just really, you can only do so much. And if we look at the actual breakdown there as well, 68k just from the AP shells. I got a lot of citadels against unwary cruisers there as well. So you get a bit closer to cruisers, and with the longer range shots, because of that shell arc, they then tend to become plunging hits, and it's a bit harder to do the citadels. But you get a bit closer, and you can be absolutely lethal, as you can in any of the quick-firing ships. I mean, even something like an Atlanta or a Flint with AP shells against other cruisers, you can pump out a lot of damage very quickly. So, lastly, we come to a look at the actual armour layout of this thing. So, thanks to the handy-dandy new armour viewer, which is a very nice feature indeed, we can see that this thing doesn't have a lot of armour at all. Now, the Tier 7 cruisers don't generally as a rule, but this is, yeah, it's particularly lightly armoured across most of the ship. And as you can see, the fore and aft, most of the superstructure, I mean, it's 10, 20, 13, well, 19 millimeters. So if we strip away the superstructure, the turret's not particularly armoured either. You will sometimes lose the turrets. The best of it is 102 faceplate armour. If we remove those, and we'll remove the auxiliary rooms armour, if I'll just get rid of that as well, we're left with the bit that you want to know about the Citadel. So, yeah, the good news is it doesn't protrude much above the waterline. There is a little bit. You've got to really hit at the waterline to get the citadel of this thing. And obviously, if you're in a turn and let's say you're turning this way and you're exposing more of your side, then that's going to make it a bit easier. The bad news is, though, it's very poorly armoured for a citadel. Now, the ends are 63mm at the front and rear, and part of the top armour is 76mm. You've got 51mm there, and then there's this big blue area of 6mm right in the middle of the ship. So you are rather vulnerable to plunging fire. If shells manage to come in and strike in the right way, then yeah, it, along with a lot of the other British cruisers, are not going to do well against big guns. And you actually got to see some of that in that last game where the Fuso fired at me. And I got a bit lucky, actually, but he still shaved off a reasonable chunk of my health. So it's possible to die very, very quickly in this, as it is with the other British cruisers. And, well, just cruisers generally. But some of them are much better at dodging than others. So, to sum it up, yeah, basically, I think this could easily be a tier 8. You just give it a few more hit points, slightly better gun range, voila, tier 8 premium. Now, of course, that would be worth worse, even, for your wallet, but it would make the ship a bit better balanced. It would make more sense for it to have access to things like the concealment system. As it is, though, at tier 7, yeah, I kind of think it's a bit overpowered. Or rather, maybe I should add a little caveat to that. I think it could easily be overpowered in the hands of even a decent player. I think an incompetent player is probably not going to get much out of this. It's not like the Imperator Nikolai, where, barring running into a lot of torpedoes, you can just go and wreck face very, very easily. This requires a bit more hard work, but then so does the E-25, and if you can get yourself into the right kind of positions, you can be immensely powerful. So as a damage dealer, it is an extremely potent ship. And I'm kind of scratching my head why it is the way it is at tier 7. But then some of the things that have gone into the British cruiser line generally have made me scratch my head. So the Belfast isn't alone in that. So hopefully you found this look at the Belfast useful. And if you have, you can hit the like button. You can leave any comments below. You can sub to my channel if you haven't already. And as always, stay tuned for more.